supply chains are predominantly set up and maintained by companies, whether they're European, American, Japanese. Most of them are multinational. That's why we have supply chains. So they have the most knowledge, and they have the most insight into the cost of relocating some of that supply chain. So I think for the government to play a bigger role, they would really need to be able to work with these companies, not just dictate, because I think there is a certain level of switching cost involved. No one's quite sure exactly how much switching cost is involved, but it's important to know what that is, and you got to work with the companies. And keep in mind, a lot of these supply chains have been built up for over 10 or 15 years. And let's not forget, if COVID didn't happen, I don't think anybody would even be thinking that much about supply chains. And there's a reason for that. It's because they have actually operated quite well. Companies think a lot about the security and the integrity of their supply chains because it's so important. Just think about Boeing too, right? In trying to build a 787 Dreamliner, they ran into some problems with their supply chains. So every company deal with that. So it's not. I think the risk perception seems high because of COVID, but there's always been a risk to it, and people have always tried to manage the supply chains to the best of their ability. But I think what I've been trying to say is that there's some forces now in East Asia, not just in China, this ecosystem effect that's extremely hard to rewind because it's so powerful. Right. One analogy I like to make is when we talk about ecosystems, think just on an individual level about Android and iOS, Apple system. Most individuals loathe switching from Android to iOS and back and forth. You're either, if you're with Android, you're with Android. You're with iOS, you're with iOS. Why? Because they both are very good and they do their job really well. And there's a switching cost. You got to, redo all your apps and all that kind of stuff, and nobody wants to do it. Now, this is a very simple analogy, but think about it with the complexity of the global supply chain. Pick an industry. And so if you have an ecosystem that works relatively well already, why force somebody to change? Unless you point out specifically what is critically missing or what is insecure about it. And so, COVID has highlighted some of it, but those, that's an outlier incident that doesn't necessarily say that, sort of global supply chains have been sort of poorly managed.